Greetings, Race community. Brent coming in live with an extra special guest today. I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Jenifer Ward, who is the president at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, which is approximately 9 miles from the farm that I grew up on. Welcome, Dr. Ward.
Thank you for having me. 9 miles? I had no
idea. 9 miles.
Okay.
I am right outside. I grew up right outside of Frankville on a 160-acre farm. If you're happening to catch this on YouTube, you will see that I am wearing my Norwegian flag shirt, which we'll talk a little bit more about, courtesy of Pulpit Rock Brewing Company in Decorah, Iowa, which is a good product of Luther College, and hopefully we can touch on that. But the reason that Dr. Ward is joining us today is really by a recommendation from one of our prior guests, Martin Shell of Stanford, who many of you enjoyed hearing from. And he shared that as a fellow native Arkansan, he and Dr. Ward crossed paths early in their respective journeys into higher education leadership. And we thought it would be a no-brainer as we try to include more presidential voices as we talk about the intersection of innovation and fundraising. And so with all of that said, Dr. Ward, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
One of the ways we've been kicking off is really, it's hard to find a higher education leader who doesn't have some shaping of their career path that links back to their own collegiate journey. And so I would love for you to take me back to the log cabin Democrat days, junior year of high school in Ohio. Who was that Jenifer? What was she into? What led her to Hendrix College? And did you always speak German growing up? Take it away.
Okay, well, first of all, it was Arkansas, not Ohio, although I did start my teaching career at the College of Worcester in Ohio, so that's...
I don't know why. If I said Ohio, I definitely meant Arkansas, so okay, well, my mistake.
Woo pig suey. So I think that there was something in the water in Conway, Arkansas, because Martin and I both had dads who were in very different professions. His dad was a pastor. Mine was at that time a newspaper editor and a musician and everything else, everything else on earth. But there was something about the way we were raised and the teachers we had and the education we received at Hendrix College that was really unique. When I was a junior in high school, I was just starting to take German. I had never taken German, and to be honest, I was trying to do French and Spanish. At Conway High School, they had this thing where you had a semester of one language and then a semester of the other, and I couldn't get into French, so I ended up in German. But that was the beginning of a great journey for me, because my high school teacher, and I doubt she's listening, but Susan DeBoard changed the trajectory of my life. This was the kind of high school teacher who said, I see something in you, and I think you can really do language well. And there's this national organization called the National Federation of Students of German. I don't know if it still exists. And they're having a conference in Gunnison, Colorado, and you should go. And I said, well, I'm this 16-year-old kid in, rural Arkansas. How on earth would I even think about that? And she said, I and Charlie will take you. So Charlie DeBoard was her then fiance, and they were going to take us and one other student to Colorado for this thing. What I didn't figure out until later is that they had then got married, and they put me and my friend Wanda in the car and drove us to Gunnison, Colorado, dropped us off at the college out there, and then they went to Aspen for their honeymoon. So they took me and my classmate on their honeymoon so that we could have this opportunity that they thought would give us a leg up in the world and would allow us to enrich ourselves and so on. And so that started a journey where I then went to college at Hendrix to study under the professor that she had studied under. And it was and he was exactly the same kind of teacher. That sort of all in, I'm gonna go out of my way to create opportunities for you that maybe I didn't have when I was growing up, and that I can provide for you given my platform. And so it was pretty incredible. So no, I didn't learn German growing up. I'm from Scots-Irish heritage, although I've learned now that I've also got some Norwegian background, which gives me some, street cred here in Decorah, Iowa. But no, German was not on the radar. I laugh and say if Susan DeBoard had been teaching physics, I might be a physicist right now, which is a big fat lie. I would not be a physicist, but
it's just so remarkable how often we hear about these inflection points where it's that one person, that one moment. It's kind of like, I've referenced this before, but the movie, Back to the Future. And it's like, if at that moment this thing happened, then the whole trajectory changes. And it is really remarkable. I don't know. I mean, when you say like my teachers took me on their honeymoon, it might come off, the wrong way these days, but it sounds like it was a really, really pivotal moment. And I am curious then, as you started at Hendrix College, was that really the catalyst to just know, wow, like this language thing is for me? And then also, what is a BA in German? What do you actually do? What do you focus on, at that time?
Well, I wish I could tell you that at the age of 16, I knew exactly what my trajectory was going to be and exactly why I was going to study German and that I would go on and get my PhD and so on. And I did not. What I knew was that I loved the experience of learning about a new culture and literally speaking in a different language and hearing people in a different language and translating and interpreting. And we'll get to maybe how that has served me as president of a college. But I loved the experience, and I didn't know that much about German culture, but I knew music. I knew Bach and I knew Beethoven and I knew art, I knew the Romantics. And so all of these things sort of pulled together into this tapestry that was just exciting and fun. So at that point, it was just, I love this, I will do this.
Yeah.
I love this, therefore I will study it. And then, BA in German, that's a really good question. I didn't know what I would do with that. So I said, okay, I'll go on to graduate school and I'll do more of these things I love. And I'll study more literature and watch movies and listen to music and speak language and teach and talk to students and so on. And it was really at that point, I did a Fulbright my third year of graduate school. And that was the point at which I realized, okay, there's actually a career called doing this stuff that I love. And so I went on and got my PhD then and went into teaching. But it was not the case that I knew what that path was and I had charted it out and, this will lead to that and so on.
Yeah.
I sort of stumbled along the path.
I've made some notes and we're going to come back to this because I think in 2021, in the context of what degree are you going to get what job?
Yeah.
I do want to get your take on what that means for BAs in German at Luther or beyond, but we'll come back to that. I do want to just share quickly. So I grew up a couple of miles outside of the Decorah School District and I went to Postville High School. And you might know that Postville had been just a tremendous melting pot in the 1990s with all of the immigration. We had the largest kosher meatpacking plant in the United States in Postville. Significant immigration from all over Central America and also Eastern Europe. And so I was in sixth grade and all of a sudden we had Slava Leontiev showed up to our class the first day without a single word of English. And then we started having Mexican students show up. And it was like, in Postville, if you were Catholic, you were diverse. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of the environment we were in. And so living through this transformation was really amazing. And I ended up getting very involved with the Mexican community just through church, through our, through volunteer activities. And so I had the exact same experience that you did in Spanish. And I just went all in. I got so obsessed with learning Spanish. I was listening to Spanish music before, on CDs that I was buying from Columbia House or something like that. And I had that same feeling of just being able to communicate with somebody in their native language is really special. I ended up going on to play football at Brown University, and I ended up studying Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian. So very much kind of, kindred spirit in that regard.
Yeah. One time there was something very telling, an experience that I had that was very telling to me about how I thought about all this. And I didn't sort of track it until later. I was in the subway in Berlin with a colleague of mine, and she kept talking to me in English, and I kept sort of rebuffing her and wanting to only speak in German, and but we're friends, and she kept saying things in English, and I would say no. And finally, she said, "Why don't you want to speak in in English with me?" And I said, "Because I don't want them to know we're tourists." And she said, "But we are." And I thought at that moment, what is the big deal? But later I thought there was something about that experience of wanting to be so immersed in that moment that I could become that person that I was not. That was telling to me, and I wonder if sometimes actors don't have that same kind of experience, So it was like a way to be an actor without being on the stage, I suppose.
Right, you're in your German character, basically, right? Yeah. And so, tell me a little bit about the small college experience at Hendrix, going to a place like Vanderbilt. Had you easy adjustment, challenging adjustment? I mean, what was that experience like?
Well, it was a somewhat challenging adjustment because, Hendrix was tiny at that point. It's a little bit bigger than it was at that time. But when Martin and I were in college, I don't think we were even at 1,000 students. It was in the sort of 900 student range. And so you really did just know everybody, number one. And number two, you didn't have 7,000 things that you could choose from to do on a daily basis. It was this week. Here are the 5 things you will go to. And what it meant was that everybody went to those 5 things. And so there was this real residential liberal arts community that I think is hard to replicate in great big colleges where, you have this big menu of choices of things to do. So that was a switch. Going to a large university in a large city, Nashville, compared to Conway, Arkansas was pretty big. But the other thing was that I was a teacher, I was a TA, so I had gotten funding to go to Vanderbilt. And so I was also teaching now for the first time. And the students were very different from the students I had been surrounded by at Hendrix. And I don't want to throw anybody under the bus or make fun of this, but I said to someone at one point, I said, I feel like I'm walking into every class prepared to teach a lesson to someone, and they've shown up to a cotillion. So there was a level of kind of prestige or well-resourcedness that I was not used to, where Hendrix was, where there were certainly kids of means at Hendrix, but for the most part, we were sort of the weird, scrappy, smart kids in Arkansas that were drawn to Hendrix. And that was not my experience teaching at Vanderbilt. So it was a little bit of a transition.
But you were there for quite a period of time. I do have to ask what your dissertation was about, and if you would share it in German, that would be ideal. So.
Oh, es ist so lange her, seitdem ich eine Dissertation geschrieben habe. Ich habe über Margarete von Trotta geschrieben. Die ist eine Filmemacherin in Deutschland, und ich habe die 5 sogenannte deutsche Filme von Margarete von Trotta studiert.
Love it. Well, we have had at least one fluent German speaker on the podcast. And so if he's listening, I'm going to ask him to share the summary, but maybe the quick summary in English just for all of us.
The filmmaker Margarete von Trotta, who did 5 so-called German films. So she did lots of different films, but these 5 films were about the experience of Germanness. And womanness. They all had central characters who were women. Wow,
I love it. And so you complete the PhD. You're teaching during that journey. Had a long run at Vanderbilt. Nashville is a great place. You like music. I'm sure you caught plenty of good music while you were there.
I did. I made some music. I was part of a group.
Okay.
My nickname is Jenny K in my family, and so I was the lead vocalist of Jenny K and the Sidewinders. It's a true fact.
I am gonna look up Jenny Kay and the Sidewinders on Spotify, and if we can
Yeah.
find anything, I'm gonna share it with our audience.
I feel confident there's nothing there. I don't think we made it that far.
What was your favorite song that Jenny Kay and the Sidewinders ever released?
Oh, we didn't release anything. We did one recording, and I think that wasn't even Jenny Kay and the Sidewinders. I think this other woman, Laura, was leading that. But we were mostly just playing around, venues at Vanderbilt and things along those lines for fun. But we did covers of Patsy Cline stuff and sort of roots country and those kinds of things.
Did students ever show up and sort of be like, Professor Ward, what, were they surprised, or was this just a part of your persona?
I was the director of the International House at Vanderbilt, McTier International House. And so there were, I don't know how many students, but probably, a couple of hundred students, maybe 300 students who lived in the residence hall. And so I sort of knew them as the director of the International House, as well as being their German professor or their German TA. So I was always kind of straddling that line between, just another graduate student and quote professional person. So no, we had a good time. It was great fun, and I miss those days.
Any favorite performance that you saw during your time in Nashville?
Yeah, for sure. So one was the Talking Heads. And one was Joan Armatrading. And I'm sure lots of people know Talking Heads. I'm not sure how well known Joan Armatrading is, but those would be the two that stand out.
I love that. I actually have a former colleague whose father was a huge Joan Armatrading fan, and I just kind of discovered her recently. So that's a fun coincidence. So you're at Vanderbilt.
Talking Heads was being. I'm desperately afraid that the balcony of the gym where the concert was going to fall in, and I was going to plunge to my death, but because people were jumping up and down and whatnot. But
wow, poignant. And so I do want to ask, given that this is a fundraising oriented conversation, and I know you've done a little bit of academic work around fundraising, which is, I think, somewhat rare for college presidents, but at that time at Vanderbilt, did you know about advancement, alumni relations, development? Was it on your radar, or really not, recognizing that the sector was much more immature at that time? So I'm just kind of curious when you first started seeing that intersection of your work academically with the fundraising enterprise.
So I knew of it in two ways. One was that because McTier International House was not a well-funded, particularly well-funded organization, at Vanderbilt, there was always a little bit of a fundraising effort for international things at Vanderbilt, to do programming, to do things along those lines. And so I would end up being parts of conversations with, and I probably didn't even know at the time that these were potential donors. But as director of the International House, I would be a part of conversations, which I now recognize as cultivation and stewardship and all those kinds of things. At the time, I just thought I was telling the story about McTier International House and why it was really great, right? So that was the one angle. And the other angle was that my dad had always been, in one way or the other, involved in sort of development or advancement work. Even at the after he had been the editor of the newspaper, he left that to write biographies about Winthrop Rockefeller, one of which was about Winthrop Rockefeller's philanthropy. So he had a foot in that world all along. And then he worked for the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, and he was the director of public affairs at University of Central Arkansas, which now is called something different, but at that time it incorporated the development wing of the institution. So I knew about those things, and I also knew about it in a different way, but this is going to sound really weird, and but I think you'll get it. I grew up in a family that had a grandfather who was a little rural Baptist preacher who traveled around in Arkansas and went to different parsonages in Arkansas and Mississippi. And he had 8 kids, one of which was my dad. And every time they would get to a new place, they would, be there for a few years. And the way they subsisted was not just with whatever salary he got as the preacher, but the weekly poundings where people would bring a pound of coffee or a pound of sugar or a pound of meat or sometimes a side of meat or a pound of butter and just leave it on the porch. And so the idea was that this community knew that they needed to help sustain the mission of my grandfather's ministry that served them and that they loved. So it was not, it wasn't development, it wasn't advancement, it wasn't even, book versions of philanthropy, but that's what it was. These people
what it was?
loved something and wanted to sustain it.
You know what it was, Dr. Ward? It was crowdfunding.
Yeah.
Before they called it that. It was GoFundMe before they called it that. And it is really amazing to hear about just that grassroots support. And I do think being able to connect my gift of coffee to your grandfather, the eggs to your grandfather, like that connection is clear. That gets people excited about giving. My gift to the annual fund, not as clear. And so how do we create that same dynamic and connection where it feels like my gift, my philanthropic gift in 2021 can feel as high impact as leaving the pound of coffee, on the stair step for your grandfather?
Yeah, well, two things. One is that while my dad and his brothers and sisters probably weren't thinking in these terms, they have ended up being philanthropic in their, my dad's no longer with us, but they ended up being philanthropic in their various ways, in their respective ways in their lives, not because anyone came and connected the dots for them from the eggs that, or the coffee that showed up to some notion of philanthropy, but they observed and they incorporated that into their own sort of way of being in the world. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is when I talk to my development team, one of the things that we talk about is how do we, of course, we need to steward and uplift our high capacity, high impact donors, 100%. But how do we give as much impact in how we describe our work to that person who's a senior at Luther College, who is working on the Student Philanthropy Council, who is either writing a note to a donor or is making their first $5 gift to something that is meaningful and important to them, so that we continue building out that pipeline and building out that ethos that's not even so much about dollars as it is about orientation.
Yeah, no, you're so spot on. And we recently completed a merger between our company and ThankView, and I believe Luther College has worked with ThankView in a certain regard, and thinking about ways to authentically connect the student voice, the faculty voice, your voice, frankly, in a more scalable way to more donors. Yes, very top of the giving pyramid, we'll have stewardship plans, and whom you're supposed to reach out to when and who gets invited to the special, events and all of that. But for everyone else, how can we create a little bit more of that? Your gift, Brent, was like a dozen eggs for me, the student, even if the money goes into a general fund and then it somehow gets rerouted in a way that has, a less direct impact, but that we're able to channel the story and the impact in that same way.
Yeah, and I think that part of that is about reframing the enterprise, so to speak, from the what to the why, because when you're talking about dollars, you get stuck in that what category. The building X is janky and needs to be renovated. Initiative Y doesn't have enough money to do things, and so we need these dollars.
Right.
And so
need to fix the track. It's like, okay,
yeah, we need
to track.
Yeah. But when you start reframing that as the why, always leading with the why, it's easier to move out of that transactional space. And so yes, the track needs fixing. But why do we care that the track needs fixing? What is it about the experience of a student athlete that's not about running and winning a race, which is hugely important, but is about the skills and aptitudes and so on that they learn through their experience as a student athlete? So going like 10 levels below the dollar to, here's what we're actually trying to accomplish. And it's hard to go there because, there are only so many minutes in a day, and you need the dollars too,
For sure. No, and I look, I think it's the why for sure. And also the who, the whom. It's I am the student. Like, I am so psyched that we've got this new track. Thank you, Dr. Ward, for making this possible. Here's a little bit about my story.
Yeah.
And without people like you, this education opportunity impact doesn't happen. And so, the track was fixed, but really why and for whom, and how do we really personalize that as much as possible? And it sounds like you're super aligned there. I do want to just know a little bit, making the move from Nashville as you went to Gustavus Adolphus, big change, maybe a little bit more like Hendrix College of an environment, maybe not, but just tell me a little bit about making that move, and again, spending a dozen years, in really a leadership role, at least departmentally there.
Yeah. So I went to Gustavus via a couple of other jobs. So I started my teaching career at the College of Worcester in Northeast Ohio, but same kind of school. And then I had 1 year at Rhodes College before I went to Gustavus. So both of those institutions before I got to Gustavus were great for me. Starting out at the College of Worcester was a fantastic place to start. Rhodes was good because I was just there for 1 year, but I was teaching me. Those were it's 2 hours away from where I grew up. It's in Memphis. Those were my tribe, and so it was fun. And that had not been the case at Worcester. So it was fun to teach at Rhodes for that year. But I got to Gustavus, and Gustavus was really the first time that I had moved out of my comfort zone in terms of where I was going to be a native. And I wasn't going to be a native, but I had done lots of travel. I just talked to you about wanting to blend in, wanting not to be taken for a tourist. I got really jazzed doing that. But just like an actor who goes on the stage and occupies a character for a minute and then goes back out of it, that was what I was always doing with travel, or even with study abroad or things like that. Going to Gustavus, tenure track job, this is where I'm going to be. This is going to be my life. This is who I'm going to be. And it was not like what I grew up with. It would now, Decorah is more, covered up in Norwegians. Gustavus was Swedish. And so I got to my first class on the first day, and I had my class list of this, first class, and it was Kirsten Anderson, Christy Anderson, every name was
a lot of Anders back then. Yeah.
Every name was a version of the same. And then I walked into the classroom, and every person was blonde haired and blue eyed. And I thought, okay, I grew up in a part of the South that was, Conway was probably 30, 35, 40% African American. My high school was integrated. It was just very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I struggled really the first few years at Gustavus, because I knew I was not just sort of going in for a trip and then coming back out. And so it took me a while to settle in there. And the more I spent time there and got into leadership, I think the easier it became for me. And it was really when I became the department chair of modern languages, literatures, and cultures, which is a big department at Gustavus. It has, all French, German, Spanish at the time, French, German, Spanish, Russian, Japanese, Latin American studies, a big language learning center, Scandinavian studies, Swedish, it was big. And that's where I sort of felt like, oh, okay, no, I can have this home, because look at this sort of melting pot of all these different cultures and so on. So it was the micro culture within the larger culture that allowed me to find the foothold and say, okay, no, I can do this. This is good. I can do this.
I should have asked, but did you pick up any other languages along the way?
Yeah, I did a little bit of Spanish in high school, and I took French in college. And I'm one of those people who, when I was at Vanderbilt, they would call from the Rotary International convention, because they always met at Opryland at the time, and they said, send Jenifer Ward over there to serve as an interpreter. And I said, okay, well, do you have lots of people from Germany? And they said, because the first year I'd done it, they did. And they said, well, no. And I said, well, then what do you need me for? And they said, well, you'll be better than we are. And they were right, because there's a way in which, and you know this from Spanish, if you learn one language, you have a set of skills that just prepares you to try to, muddle through any other language. And so, through animated gestures, through, drawing pictures on napkins, I could get further than the deer in the headlights person,
right,
front desk at the Opryland Hotel,
Well,
So,
it's fun to say that you've translated so many other languages without speaking them. That is yeah.
Yeah, without speaking a word. And then when I was in Seattle, I was the dean at Cornish College of the Arts.
And I had never heard of Cornish College of the Arts until I did my research for this meeting. So tell me more about it. And
if you've heard of Merce Cunningham or John Cage, you've heard of Cornish College of the Arts, because that's where they got their start, and that's where they did their great collaboration. And
got it.
Yeah, so it's a visual and performing arts college in downtown Seattle, and a tiny little school, wonderful people. Everyone there is a working artist. Students are crazy wonderful. The commencement ceremony at Cornish College of the Arts is unlike any I've ever seen, and just everybody shows up in costume and themes, and they bring gifts to their department chairs, and it's raucous, and
wow.
It's really great. Yeah.
And so this thread of like language and arts,
yeah,
from high school persists through your time there. I want to talk about your time in Louisiana. Certainly, when I think Luther College, I think of that same intersection: arts,
yeah,
culture, language, etc. So tell me about the trip to Louisiana, and then ultimately, when did you, along this journey, when did you think to yourself, you know what, I might like to be a college president someday? Was that an early aspiration, or along the way, when did it click?
Yeah, for sure not. If you had told me when I was in high school at Conway, high school, you're going to be a college president, I would not have believed you. So something important happened in the spring of 2012, which is that when I was at Cornish in Seattle, which is that my dad died. And he had a long illness. He had lymphoma, and I think, as is often the case when someone has that kind of loss, even if the loss is not happening at that place, you associate that grief with that place. So that was one thing that happened. And I was also not sure how my mom was going to do, because she was back in Arkansas. I mean, it turns out she has no use for me whatsoever. She's a gigging jazz pianist. She was, I needn't have worried. But this opening came up at Centenary College of Louisiana to be the provost. And that's a Methodist school like Hendrix was. I had known about Centenary from my time at Hendrix. And it, about 3 hours from where my mom lived. And so I thought, you know what, this may be the universe telling me that there's an opportunity for me to, do the work I love, but also be closer to mom, see if she's going to be okay, and so on. So I threw my hat in the ring, and I ultimately, I took that role. And so it was partly, I just needed to move because I needed to dislodge that grief that was located where I had experienced it. And partly because I was concerned about my mom and so on. And I was interested in what was going on at Centenary. So I took that role, and I spent about 5 years in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is this fascinating part of Louisiana. You've got the sort of Creole Cajun French stuff coming up from New Orleans. You've got the sort of cowboy Latino stuff coming over from Texas. You've got the Old South coming over from Mississippi, and you've got the kind of Ozark mountain culture coming down from Arkansas, and they all just collide in Shreveport. So it was fascinating. I loved my time in Shreveport, and I missed that quite a lot. But I would say that that's probably, I did some sort of development work when I was at Cornish. But I would say that Centenary is where I really started paying attention and thinking about the degree to which I loved that work, partly because I loved telling these stories, and so I enjoyed that time. When I was at Cornish, I started getting, outreach from search consultants who would say, so-and-so has nominated you for X presidency. And it was the first time that I got a nomination for a presidency that I thought about it.
Is that common? I mean, how does one get nominated?
Yeah. So typically what happens in presidential searches is that the institution will engage an executive search firm that specializes in higher education. And they'll send out, they'll blanket their contacts with, do you have any names for us? Who would you recommend? And so on. So somewhere along the line, somebody who had worked with me, probably in the Modern Language Association, where I had a national position for a while, thought I had, what they thought this institution needed, and they nominated me. But I really had not had presidential aspirations until somebody said, you should be a college president. And, my first response was, okay. And then my second response was, oh shucks. And then my third response was, because I think the more I advanced in higher education administration, the more I started seeing how much bigger the picture was than the one I had seen before. And then that picture would expand to the next bigger picture. And then, and then that would expand. And I think by that time I was starting to think, I don't want to be that person who complains about administration and complains about presidents and is not willing to get in there herself and try to be of service to this profession.
And so, to the extent you can share, when did you start fielding those opportunities in earnest? Because my sense would be, once you kind of came to that, first somebody says, you can do it, you should do it.
Yeah.
You go from, oh shucks, to, what?
Yeah.
Maybe I could,
Yeah.
maybe I'd like to. Do you then have to start a networking process to get to know those search firms? I mean, how does that happen? Because I'm sure there are folks listening today who are like, I might like to do that someday, but I really have no idea how you throw your hat in the ring.
Yeah. So, I would say the first couple of times it was sort of like, I'm not ready for that. I'm not going to do that. It was really when I was at Centenary that I started entertaining the idea in earnest, and partly because I was getting more and more nominations and just sort of had to confront this question more. And so what I did, and what I would recommend that others do, is look at national organizations like the Council of Independent Colleges. I've always been in the independent the private college sphere. There are other kinds of organizations that work for public universities and so on. But they have kind of roadmap to the presidency kinds of programs, or CIC also does one on the vocation of a college president, and ACE, the American Council on Education, has a great big year-long process where you sort of shadow people. And so there are these kind of, professional development opportunities that can set you on that path. And a couple of them, like the one on vocation, it really is asking the question, do you see this as a vocation? Do you really want to do this? Are you sure you want to do this? Let's do some work on who you are, and let's ask questions about why you would want to do this. And then at the end of it, I suspect some people say, you know what, I don't. The more I think about it, thank you. And then some people see, no, this is really truly what I want to do. So I did one of those. I did a little shorter sort of week-long one. And then I also did a week-long principles and techniques of fundraising, through the Lilly School, through the fundraising school. And it was those two together, I think, that said, no, this is actually truly what I want to do. I really want to do this. Now, my timing was lousy, because starting a college presidency 6 months before a pandemic hits, I would not recommend. I wouldn't recommend that timing to to anyone. But I had no way of knowing at the time. No.
And you started anyway. You show up in beautiful Decorah, Iowa, and it really is a spectacular town. I'm biased, but when you think about the intersection of higher education and local economic development, I mean, you just can't imagine that place without Luther College, as sort of this engine of growth and employment and all of these things. What was your initial impression? It is a small town, 5,000, 7,000 people, something like that. Maybe it's grown a little bit, but
seven-ish. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had 6 months pre-pandemic, at least, to drink from the fire hose in a, in-person context. What was that like? And, how does one onboard as a college president, where you truly have to be a jack of all trades, master of none except for German, maybe?
Yeah. Well, I think that if there are people who have presidential aspirations, I would first of all say, be really, really conscious of the community in which that college, lives. Because being a college president in a small town is 1,000 times different from being a college president in a large city.
I mean, you must get recognized everywhere you go. You go to the Whippy Dip. You go to whatever, Pulpit Rock. Yeah. I mean,
everywhere.
People just
yeah. And
are you taking selfies, signing autographs? I mean, is it that level of
No, selfies, yes, but no autographs. Autographs, no. So the first semester that I was here was, first of all, the beginning of the school year, the opening convocation, the big homecoming thing, which is a big deal at Luther, where 1 billion people come back to town and so on. But one of the things for my inauguration, which was on November 2nd of that year, that I had said early on when we were planning it, is that I wanted to take seriously that Luther understood its role as being an economic driver in this community, and that we saw Decorah as our community that we were going to connect with. And I think that was a very necessary message for me to give. And one of the ways I gave it is when we were planning the inauguration. And so, there were all of these activities on Friday during the day, and then the ceremony on Saturday, and the big concert on Sunday, and so on. But the question was, what are we going to do on Friday night? And people were thinking, well, we could have a talent show on campus. We could do this, we could do that. And I said, no, let's go downtown. Let's move everything downtown. Let's talk to businesses, see if they want to host our students doing things. Let's see if Impact Coffee will open their doors and have something. Pulpit Rock created a special beer for the occasion. There were parties, there were banners. And it was incredible. And it was and it wasn't really about celebrating me. It was about celebrating the relationship between this college and this town and saying, no, we don't expect you to come over here and find a parking place and come into some event or another. We're going to take business to you. All the people.
It's almost like,
yeah,
it's like you flipped homecoming on its head or something.
Yeah.
It's like, let's all leave campus and go
right.
to the surrounding area. Yeah.
Yeah. Or to recognize that campus doesn't have a big bubble around it. You know, there's no big fence, and that campus in this kind of small town has to be understood as extending into the city. And when we have, you know, I don't know, when we have international students come from far-flung countries all over the world to be here, these are not going to be necessarily, you know, kids with Norwegian surnames and blonde hair and blue eyes. And I need for this community to embrace this college. And for them to embrace this college means that we have to embrace the importance of this town for our survival. So it's a kind of, you know, mutually assured sustainability kind of approach, I would say.
Can you tell me, I mean, you did join 6 months before. It sounds like the pandemic, or I mean, the convocation was sort of this pinnacle, and then things start to go, you know, downhill, you know, with the pandemic or shift quickly. So you go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we had started a kind of presidential, you know, introduction tour across the country. So the plan was that we would have these sort of alumni events in different parts of the country. And so we did one in Southern California, we did one in Northern California, we did one in Denver, we did one in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and then, you know, the needle scratched across the record, and that was the end of that because of the pandemic. So the plan had been for that whole year to be these sort of going around the country and visiting with alumni groups and so on, and that just got halted. And so the weird thing now is having, you know, I'm in my third year now, I'm 2.5 years in, and on the one hand, it feels like I've been here for 1,000 years. And on the other hand, I feel like I still don't know a lot of people in person. I can't have known a lot of people in person. So one of the things that we did at Luther, I had just hired, I was able to hire a vice president for development, and Stephen Sporer and I sort of put our heads together with his team, and we came up with this plan to do what we called Zoom coffees. So where we would ask one of the members of our board of regents to identify, you know, 10 people who would join us for a Zoom coffee some morning. And what we thought we were doing was connecting with these 10 individuals and telling them about the college and telling them about me and, you know, my vision and so on. What we didn't really calculate is what I consider to be almost more valuable than that, which is that we created opportunities for them to connect with each other. There were times when I felt like I could just like turn audio and video off, and they wouldn't have even noticed that I was gone, because they were reconnecting with each other and they're telling stories about how much they loved Luther. And remember that one time when we did so and so, and hey, person X, I know you went to Luther at a different time that we did. Did you go to the such and such? It was something. And so I think that we'll try to continue those, because, you know, on one call we would have somebody here in Decorah, somebody in La Crosse, somebody in Australia, somebody on the West Coast, somebody on the East Coast. It was our way of trying to keep the sort of stewardship boat afloat when I couldn't be going out to doing these things. Yeah.
And there's been a lot of talk about the pros and cons of in-person versus remote. We're doing remote right now. I feel like I'm getting to know you well, you know, in this medium. Would it be great if we could be together in person? Sure. Would it be efficient? No, for no one. And so when you think about the the demand on your time as a college president, that of your peers, I would imagine the efficiency of being a part of those 10-person Zoom coffees, or being able to drop in and say hello in a one-on-one conversation with the key prospect, even if it's for 10 or 15 minutes. I mean, what a gift that I hope we can take away from this really challenging period that was the pandemic. And imagine trying to facilitate that kind of 10-person discussion at a happy hour, at a dinner party. It would be random and almost impossible. And the way that you can thoughtfully sort of engineer who you want to get together and have you be more of the facilitator, or almost the, Socratic method, getting everybody talking with each other versus feeling like you need to do the formal keynote and tell everyone what you think. I mean, it sounds like it was really eye-opening.
Yeah, and so I guess the message for me has been, or the learning for me has been, to understand that there is an appropriate modality for each kind of thing that you're trying to do. And it needn't be all or nothing. We do very well with black, we do very well with white. We kind of suck when it comes to the grayscale, and most everything really probably should live in the grayscale. And so it is not the case that a remote faculty meeting works as well as a remote Zoom coffee with 10 alumni from different generations all over the world. And so there are things that, in this current conversation about the Great Resignation and hybrid and remote and so on and so forth, that I find really challenging, because as a residential college, part of the work is not just you fulfilling your tasks. Part of the work is being part of a dynamic, activated community, so that when a student comes into a building or a coworker comes into a building, they don't just see two tumbleweeds rolling through and hear a lonesome whistle blow.
Yeah.
And so to disaggregate different modalities and when to use them from some sort of blanket, let's all go remote now.
Right.
Or I'll be in person now,
Yeah, no, I think you're right. The gray is where it gets challenging, because there is very good merit for, the vocal performance, the opera work, the arts at Luther, not as good on Zoom. Doesn't mean that doesn't mean you can't live stream things. And I've seen you all do things on Facebook so that if people can't be there in person, they can at least get a window in. So that's a good balance. But when you think about, really leaning back into the in-person student experience, that is sort of the polar opposite of how do we engage alumni in Australia, which 3 years ago, it meant we probably didn't. Let's be honest. Yeah. And now we are a Zoom link away from every single Luther College graduate around the world. Yeah. And so how do we kind of really lean into that strategy, while at the same time recognizing that that wouldn't be the right strategy given the mission and the vision of what the in-person residential experience should be at Luther. And I think that's the gray that a lot of leaders are struggling with right now.
Yeah, it's hard. And on the one hand, I will say, so for example, with Christmas at Luther last year, which was not in person, but it was great. And for that, I would have said, when people were despairing of trying to do something that was not in person, which is what we had always done, and what so many people value, and to them I would have said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the very, very good. There is something very, very good about a remote Christmas at Luther, and it was wonderful. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, let's not let the good be the enemy of even better, by saying, let's recognize what it is we're trying to do here, and is what we're trying to do here dependent on face-to-face interaction, or is it not? And even more nuanced, when are the times when it needs to be face-to-face and when not? What is the critical mass of people who need to be in a space for it to feel activated and dynamic? Yeah. When do we worry about the fact that my personal desire to, be remote for whatever reason, and some of the reasons are very good, starts to have an impact on the loneliness and isolation a coworker feels when they come into the office and there's nobody around. So I think those are hard conversations. And,
Yeah.
and I worry that we are on this fast train to saying, if you don't believe in 100% remote, you're just a dinosaur. I don't think that's true.
Yeah, and I've been quite public that in the advancement context, when I look at the top, populations, the centers of population for Luther College, it's Minneapolis, it's La Crosse, it's Des Moines, it's Chicago, it's Rochester. Does it make sense to have an entire fundraising team located in Decorah, traveling to all of those places periodically and then coming back? I'm not going to put you on the spot here, but I think there's a future where for something like fundraising, having somebody in Minneapolis, La Crosse, Des Moines, Chicago could make a ton of sense.
Yeah,
but that is a very different dynamic than how are we going to, have an amazing vocal, arts experience for the students.
Sure, and I think the same would hold for our enrollment, area admissions team.
Yes.
But so what we've been doing in development is I've been very clear that I want us to understand, quote, remote work in a limited way, not taking it off the table, but we do have a person who's sort of centered in closer to the Twin Cities. We've got a person in the sort of, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City kind of area. But the understanding is, yes, you're going to be concentrated on those areas. And then you're going to come back to home.
Yes.
For, this event, that event, for regular staff meetings, whatever it is, so that you are, think of it like an accordion. Where you sort of go out and then but you got to come back in at some point to get air.
Yep.
You have to come back in to
Absolutely.
get air. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to know the impact, the message, the vision that you're selling, in the development context. I know we are short on time, but I have to ask you in closing, I hinted at it earlier, but what is the role in your mind in this environment where as a college president, all college presidents are under pressure, outcomes, jobs, outcomes, probably wasn't the number one thing people talked about when you were deciding to study German, when you decided to study it. But as a mentor, as a leader in the community, when somebody says, I think I want to study German, do you say, that's great and let me help you? Or do you say, that's great, but let's keep an eye out on what that means for career path? Do you say, you know what, you might want to consider something, go study computer science because that's where the jobs are? Like, how do you balance that in your position?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, I would say you don't have to just study German. So there's a possibility at a liberal arts college for you to, let's say, major in German because you love it and you love taking those courses and you love literature and you love film and you love music and all those things. But you also are getting a grounding in a general education and, maybe a minor, but not necessarily. Now, this is my controversial statement. I think the BA is going to be not seen as the terminal degree for a lot of different fields, and so there's always graduate school. So maybe you major in German, and then you're also doing work in some other area. But let's say you just want to do German. What is it about learning and studying German that is preparing you for all different kinds of career paths that you never even considered? And so I'll circle back to what I said at the beginning. I did not say, I'm going to learn German so that I one day can be a college president where 90% of my day is spent trying to communicate with people who are different from me, who believe different things, who want different things, who are trying to hold on to different things than I think need to happen for the strategic advancement of this college. And it was learning how to interpret and learning how to translate and learning how to listen and learning how to understand nuance and texture and gesture and all of those things, and to read a different a language about a different culture than mine, and to appreciate that has given me the skills to be a college president. It's not that I can read a balance sheet. I mean, that doesn't hurt. It's not that I can't think strategically. I need to be able to do that. It's not that I don't know a basic level of things about the advancement area or the finance area or the enrollment area or the facilities area. Those are all learned skills.
Yeah. But
learning how to listen and translate and interpret and work across difference, which is what you learn when you're studying a foreign language in a foreign culture, that's really what prepared me to be a college president. And I'm not alone. I've talked to other college presidents who came out of the same background that I did in the Modern Language Association, and we agree that's what prepared us. I mean,
those are beautiful closing thoughts. And I will say, I did not study Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian so I could be a tech company CEO, but here we are. And it's a lot of the same, I was nodding emphatically as you were sharing that, because it's so right. It's about empathy. It's about communication. It's about learning enough to be dangerous across a variety of functions. But ultimately, a lot of that is going to be picked up on the job and through mentorship and so forth. I'm going to stop there. I'd love to keep going. This has been such a privilege to catch up with you. I'd love to come say hi next time that I'm in the area, if you're okay with that.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely do. Well, it's the Whippy Dip's not the only ice cream in town. We now have Sugar Bowl, which is hard ice cream. And, so early on in my presidency, I was asked to put a stake in the ground for one or the other. And I said, you will not get me to do that.
Yeah, I would go public on politics before I would pick Whippy Dip versus Sugar Bowl.
Yeah,
so,
right. But we'll go to
I love it.
Rock and enjoy a craft brew of some sort. Whippy Dip, I should just say, Pulpit Rock is the CEO of Pulpit Rock is a Luther alum. So,
and they've done the development next door too, which is
landing
beautiful.
Market, that's really fun, yeah.
The landing, yeah, and we're going to make that happen next time that I'm there. I should just say, to the extent that there are folks listening who are aspiring to go down a similar path, would like to stay in touch. I know you're on LinkedIn. I know you're on Twitter. Are those good ways to sort of reach out or touch base? Or
sure, yeah, probably. LinkedIn is good. I think because there are so many people in the Lutherverse. If they reach out to me on LinkedIn, if they can just say I'm connecting with you because of the Raise podcast.
Yes.
That helps me sort of filter out some of the things that I can't really identify. But sure.
Understood. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ward. It's been a blast learning more about your journey. I'm going to thank again Martin Schell for making the connection. We'll make sure to share the episode with him, and I wish you the absolute best as you continue to lead things at Luther. And with that, I will sign off today's episode with Dr. Jenifer Ward, President of Luther College. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.